Well, it's reached epidemic levels. Identity theft is on the rise. But whose fault is it, and can it be stopped? This is Roundtable with me, Matthew Moore. Every day we give away information about ourselves. In our data, we leave a trail of clues about who we are, what we do and where we go. But this virtual paper trail has become gold dust for criminals who can collect that data, stalk our social media and now, more easily than ever, adopt our identities.
Every day, we reveal our personal details over the internet. Email addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, credit and debit cards. Our online identities. In the wrong hands, they can be misused. Identity theft is the act of adopting someone else's identity and using their personal details for financial gain. And a leading UK fraud agency has likened it to an epidemic. UK victims of identity theft are likely to be in their 30s and 40s, while men in their 20s are seeing the biggest increases. Often these groups are targets because they've spent time building an online presence. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Much of what we post on social media can make us vulnerable.
They're aware that they're communicating their preferences, sometimes what they're doing, but what they don't realize is in some cases, particularly when you send out a picture, you're communicating a lot more. Very often the picture contains your geolocation. You're not aware of that, but with the right software you can find out where a photograph was taken, what time it was taken.
And even if we are vigilant, we can still be left exposed. When a company suffers a data leak, it can affect millions of people. The US superstore Target fell victim to a cyber attack. Bank card details and personal data were stolen from as many as 70 million customers.
What we're now seeing is identity theft being done on an industrial scale. So corporate sites are hacked, corporate databases are mined in their thousands and millions as opposed to in the ones and twos that used to occur manually in the past.
And when your data is stolen, you may not realize you've been a victim. Identity thieves can take out loans, open insurance policies, or make false purchases, the fraud only becoming apparent months or years later. We can take more care online, thinking about what we post and how it could be used. But ultimately, the rise in this kind of cybercrime reflects a global shift. Criminals are adapting to an increasingly online world. To keep our data safe, we will all have to do the same.
Well, joining me at today's roundtable is the Chief Operating Officer at C6 Intelligence, Emma Mills. She says consumers should be more vigilant when using the internet. Noel Bell, a psychotherapist who will explain why people share so much personal information online. To my left is the technology reporter, Mary Ann Russon. She says more legislation is needed for companies to stop them sharing information. And Professor David Stupples, he's the director of the Centre for Cybersecurity Studies at City University in London. Emma Mills, if I could start with you. We heard in that report another agency describing it as an epidemic. Would you agree with that, and why?
We'd certainly say the data supports that. We're adding over 30 million records of identities that are being traded between criminal gangs each month to our database. So we actually see that the numbers that we can see from the dark web far exceed the publicly available information from organisations such as CIFAS.
How many identities are up for sale out there on the dark web?
We have over 700 million records within our database. The average consumer will appear in there about 6 times. The reason for that being is that the record is initially harvested with a sort of a minute amount of information on it, and from then the criminal gangs act just as a legitimate data business would and look for other data sources and append them to that record until they have a very rich identity upon which to actually conduct the crime.
Okay. Mary Ann Russon, 700 million identities are up for sale on the dark web, and Emma was saying that the reported numbers are quite possibly much lower. So there are unreported identities out there for sale. How do we know, how can we find out if our identity is on this marketplace?
That is a very difficult question to answer. I would say that if people are concerned, the very best thing for them to do is to go to a website set up by a man called Troy Hunt. It's called iampawned.com, IAMPWNED. He's basically put up a whole database of every single known data breach. And the idea is you go to the website and you type in your email address and you see whether you've been affected by any of the previous data breaches. If you have been, very likely this is saying that you should immediately change your email password, and you should just have a look at all of your accounts that you use the most and whether or not you need to change those passwords. But it's impossible to tell. For example, my data could be on the dark web. You know, at the BBC, Rory Sallen-Jones's details were on the dark web. Luckily, it didn't really affect him because it was from many years ago. But it's entirely possible that all of our data is sitting there.
David Stupples, give some advice here how people can find out if their identity is up for sale.
Well, the databases are the best means to find this data, because for them to look onto the dark web and see if their name is there is almost impossible, because they have to know which notice boards to go to and which emporiums to go and buy this data. So that would be really very, very difficult for this normal person in the public to do. But to go to these databases and check your name, that's the best way to do it. Also, you can get some clue as to that your identity has been perhaps compromised by the number of emails you're getting, which would be phishing emails. That gives you an idea that something about you, a trace, is out there, and it's probably been for sale.
Emma, just to go back a step, perhaps, for the viewers who are not familiar with this, just explain what identity theft really is.
So it's where a criminal assumes your identity. So looking at it from an online transactional point of view, it's very difficult to tell who the real person is from the identity theft because they'll be presenting almost all the same information that you as the genuine consumer would do. So because there's no physical presence, we don't go into a bank anymore, we transact with our bank online, we make purchases online. The criminal has the same information to enter into those sites as you as the genuine consumer would have. So they transact as if they're you, and then have goods such as iPhones, very expensive clothing, wine, champagne delivered to what's called a drop house.
Now, Noel Bell, in terms of the culpability here, obviously the hackers are responsible, but also so are the consumers, the users of internet sites like Facebook. Why is it people put so many details about themselves online?
Well, I'm always intrigued when the consent box at the end of these social media profiles, where it asks you that are you okay with your personal data being shared, and they have a long list of blurb there where you tick okay. Do people really read that? But if the question was, the government will use your personal data to do with that data what it wishes to do, tick here, would there be a different response? It would make people more conscious about their level of boundaries around the amount of information they're sharing. So I think if we become more suspicious, not to the point of paranoid, but healthily suspicious about what we are sharing, then we will be in a better place, I think.
Yeah. But we have the key questions that certain sites ask you, like your mother's maiden name, for example. There are a range of questions which are offered as if you know, your date of birth and your place of birth, your mother's maiden name, and these are all being put online. Why do people feel that it's a safe and secure environment to do so because it's a sort of friendly site like Facebook?
Because we have a prime drive to affiliate and to survive. And this is what social media companies are building their platforms to take advantage of. So, particularly for young people, we are of a generation that know a pre-internet age. Younger people, it's their way of connecting and it's their way of affiliating. It's survival for them. So they don't have the kind of rational perspective that maybe is behind your questioning, because you're alluding to the risks. They're not thinking of the risks, they're thinking of the benefits.
Mary and Russon, when you're talking about consumers and prevention, would you say education was the most important tool here?
Yes and no. I mean, education is important. Yes, you should have a strong password. You should ensure that your password has numbers in it. It needs to have one capital letter, and it should have another character. You should also try and avoid using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You should avoid using, you know, things that other people might know about you. But that can only go so far. The issue is that there are a huge number of security vulnerabilities that that hackers can exploit. And most of those vulnerabilities are not actually known. The people who know about them will never tell you about them because they want to exploit them to hack into people's computer networks.
Yeah, there is the case where Yahoo is being sued now in a class action suit in the United States for a hack that involved perhaps as many as 1 billion accounts. So is Yahoo responsible there because they were slow to release the information on that hack?
All providers do have an onus to protect your information. So in any kind of case like this, the provider is in the wrong. However, I mean, with Yahoo's situation, it's a bit more complicated because Yahoo essentially knew about the data breach, did whatever it could to fix it, or didn't even fix it, and didn't tell anybody for like 2 years. That's corporate irresponsibility, so that's another question. But if you just take any other company that finds itself in a data breach situation, it is on their, if they do not have proper security, that is on them. However, because of the fact that there are so many security vulnerabilities that have not been disclosed, that is an issue. So every time when we're doing reporting, we find a huge security vulnerability and it's been disclosed and we let the world know. Every time I write about it, I just think there's a hacker out there who's really annoyed, or there's a spy agency out there who's really annoyed.
David Stupples, your department at City University is at the leading edge of developing protection against cyber hacks and so on. Where are you getting the support, and are you getting enough support?
Well, the government, through EPSRC grants and GCHQ and the National Crime Agency, through the government anyway, have earmarked a fairly large amount of money, £50 million for research into this area. Some of it will come from industry, but not as much as I would like. So yes, the money is there to do the research, but the interesting point here, and what most people don't understand, there's more research money going into the dark side than is going into the good side. And so consequently, the hackers, or the criminal gangs or criminal organizations, are always in front of the curve. So we're chasing it. And that's the real issue. We've really got to catch up.
So the funding, as you put it, not legitimate funding, you're talking about criminal funding.
Criminal funding through the criminal organisation, and some of it state-sponsored, by the way. You've got state sponsors, I'm not going to name the countries, but that actually sponsor these criminal organisations. They put billions of dollars into research into cybercrime.
Emma, how does the industry, the legitimate players in this, the government, catch up and keep up with the very well-funded criminals?
I think what they have to do is start where it begins rather than where it ends. So instead of looking at reported frauds and frauds that are known, they have to start looking at where the data is being harvested from and then collected, because it's more preventative. We always tend to be on the cure end of the scale rather than looking at where is the data coming from, how is it starting to being harvested. We were talking earlier about publicly available information such as company's house still containing dates of birth. So some of those things, when they track that series of events that occurs from a small amount of data to a full identity, they can start to identify some of those vulnerabilities where we post information unwittingly, even the government, that then helps the criminals proliferate that crime.
And David, do you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, it's really spot on that, because what we've got to do is to be able to hit the cause of this and not its effects. And we're constantly chasing the effects. So if we go back to the cause, we'll start going back to the root problems here. And then if we start addressing that, we might catch up.
Noel, just looking at the hackers themselves, they have to be of a certain intelligence to get into to the situation and to be able to offer this very valuable information. What do you think it is about their psychology where they don't take these skills to a legitimate forum where they use it here for criminality?
It just really depends on the motivation, and I'm sure David and Emma and Mary-Ann will have a lot more expertise on this, but there's different layers. So some are hardened criminals that see this massive marketplace of opportunity, and they're following a pattern of abusing trust and gaining, like it would have been burglaries and auto crime and house burglaries. But other people are motivated by different things. So spurned lovers, people who are seeking revenge, people who've had the sack, insiders who are using their knowledge to wreak revenge. So it just depends on the different level of motivation, and I think there are different layers. It's not always financial, the motivation.
And do you find that these sorts of crimes and infringements in the digital world are having as much a damaging effect as, say, a crime in the real world, say a burglary?
I think it's even more, potentially more penetrating and more longer lasting, because once something like victims of revenge porn, for instance, people I've seen who've had devastating consequences for their level of shame and their lack of power, really. It's one thing getting stuff removed from certain sites, but can you remove it from people's minds and different sites? Yeah. And that's what the legacy they live with.
Yeah. Emma, I just want to ask you about the legislation, if you like, that's going into this, and the investigations that go on. In the real world, people try to pursue a criminal, but in the digital world, it seems that the efforts are people do throw their hands up and say, well, could be conducted anywhere in the world. Is that?
I don't think it's as impossible to a task as it might seem. I think the real key lies in collaboration of different organisations and different agencies, because the information does exist. It's in pulling it together to be able to triangulate it to identify where the fraud's actually happening. So I don't think it's quite as difficult as it might seem. It's a lack of coordination that hampers the attacks rather than anything else.
Yeah, David's coming.
Yes, the one thing that worries me is that if you just look at some of the way that the criminals will gather the information, it gathers over a period of time. They might get a small amount of information and a bit more information and a bit more information. And of course, the levels are a different price this information is sold for. And what we then need to do is to stop it going up those levels. And that's very difficult to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
And eventually, when it gets to the top, that means you've got bank card details, PIN numbers, etc. And those are for sale. And I can tell you what they are on the dark web. You can buy a piece of information like that for about $500 to $1,000, depending on the credit rating of the person.
Mary-Ann Russon, I mean, they're getting very sophisticated. I was reading an article of yours where there was a report that the Japanese authorities were warning people not to even make V signs in their photographs in case their fingerprints were taken from the picture.
Yes, I would say that's a little bit unique, but yes, they were very scaremongering a bit, those Japanese security researchers, but they were essentially saying, be careful what photographs you put on the internet, right? There's a huge spate of people who like to put pictures up of their passports, of their plane tickets, when they're about, oh, I'm about to get on a plane to a dream holiday. Someone can take that, they can print it out. They can go to the airport, and they can pretend to be you. So similarly, what these researchers were saying was, your fingerprints are some of the most important things that you have because you use it to unlock your phone. Now, why would you put that right up into the camera? So I'm not going to do that, but why would you do that and put it right up to the camera where someone can take a picture and enhance it because everything's in HD now, and then use that for nefarious purpose?
Do any of you actually disagree on, in certain cases, who is to blame, whether it's the corporation or if it's the consumer? For example, I mean, you know, in the banking world, people feel quite blasé about if the fraud has taken place on their account because the bank will pick up the check. Does anybody feel that it's the consumer's responsibility as well?
I think if you take the mass release of data, as we were talking about, with several 100,000, then it's a corporate problem. It's definitely corporate because it's packed. But if it's information that's got through a phishing expedition by the criminal and it's off your Facebook, then it's your responsibility or our responsibility. So it's very difficult actually to then say down the middle of that line whose responsibility it is. We're too fond in blaming the banks and organisations where a lot of it is us.
I would tend to agree.
No.
I think the banks do put a great deal of time and effort into their fraud prevention strategies. They cannot be responsible for consumers willingly giving away their information on a fake website or giving away their one-time passcode.
Yeah.
That, I'm afraid, unfortunately, is the individual's responsibility.
Unfortunately, the key central problem with this question is that it's humans that are the issue. So maybe not banks, but look at telecoms operators. We're seeing more and more cases whereby the telecoms operator has done its best to secure your data, and when you call in to say, I've got a problem with my SIM card, or I've got a problem with my phone contract, you'll put through lots of checks. But you cannot prevent one of the customer representatives from being tricked. It's a thing called social engineering. The hacker calls up and goes, hi, I'm really sorry, my phone's been stolen. Can you please cancel my SIM card? Oh, by the way, I'm staying at my grandma's right now. Can you send a new SIM card to my grandma? And if you can trick a person, a human, to do that, then essentially, I've got your SIM card. It's in my phone now. I've hijacked your phone contract.
I'd just like to add there is that the criminals are actually learning psychological operations and they're becoming very good at it.
Yeah.
One thing I would say as well is that there's almost a modern paradox that historically your survival was based on your strong, robust social connections. You could almost see, particularly with teenagers who are having thousands of friends, that it's that very social network which will be their undoing. So there's almost a paradox there.
I just want to go around the table really quickly. We were talking before the show that in the real world, police officers would go to your house, they would conduct a safety check, they'd check your windows, your doors, your locks. In the digital world, what would you advise the viewers to do now to hold back the cyber criminals?
So I think singly the most important thing is not to have the same username and password on multiple accounts. So to have a methodology where you embed your regular password that you can remember in something that's unique each site.
David, you know, we said before, your department is at the cutting edge here. Do you think that the good guys, so to speak, in this will win eventually, or will this be a constant battle in which they are trying to catch up?
We could never win. I wouldn't say it's a constant battle to catch up, but we would never win. And there'll always be successes from the criminal side. What we have to do is, as individuals, make it more difficult for them to do it. And technology-wise, is the technologists such as iPhone, Apple, etc., to put more and more security features, as Apple have done with the fingerprint. That's a very good security mechanism. So basically, if we brought the technology side on with our education side and our personal looking after data, that would matter. But I'd like to give everyone one piece of advice. Apart from banks and government sites, lie on your information you give. Tell different lies on different sites, because then it's much more difficult to actually tie the data together.
Marianne Russon?
What I would say, and this is quite an important thing, is remember that you are still human, even though you've got these technical gadgets. Check things with people. There are a huge amount of cases now of people who buy houses, and when they're about to transfer the final funds, hackers hack into the law firm's email address, spoof it, and they are basically they get an email from the law firm saying, please can you transfer remaining funds to this account? And they just transfer it. Don't do that. Call up your barrister, your solicitor, have a chat, say, did you just send me this email? Can I just confirm these account details? You know, remember these common things, because the law firms, they don't really know how to deal with it right now.
And finally, Noel, I think people are just going to have to grow up a little bit and not put every movement and every step of their lives online.
I think the psychological aspects is exploring what is the compelling need to share. And I think that is what we all, as individuals and as users of the technology platforms, have to answer for ourselves.
Okay, Noel Bell, thank you very much. Emma Mills, thank you for your contribution. Marianne Russon and David Stupples, thank you for joining us on the Roundtable.
Pleasure.
Well, as more and more data gets uploaded and shared online, keeping our identities to ourselves could become ever harder, it seems. That was Roundtable. I'm Matthew Moore. Thank you for watching.